folks, we're here with the first proper review. We may be a day late, but we're not a dollar short. What's the first review going to be? Well, I said we'd go back with some of the stuff that I bought early on in my collecting career, and then I had a bit of a brainwave and realised that there is an album by an artist that I think is wonderful and doesn't get the credit that they deserve. That is going to be 50 years old this month. Released in January 1973, therefore will be 50 years old this month, is this, the very first album from Mr. Frankie Miller, one of the most, I don't know what the word would use, I'm going to say underrated, because everybody knows just how good he is, but the trouble is not enough people seem to know, and we need to keep spreading the word. Frankie is in the top bracket. Let's take a look at this album, Once in a Blue Moon. Now, Frankie Miller may not have recorded this debut album, Once in a Blue Moon, until late in 1972, but by then he'd already built himself up a huge reputation in live music circles and was seen by many as a superstar in waiting. His musical education had started early in life with his mother and his eldest sisters introducing him to music at a very early age, and he very quickly became fond of the soul and R&B in their collections, with Little Richard in particular hitting a note with the young Frankie. As lots of people, or lots of young boys in those times, it was a choice between football and music. Luckily for us, Frankie chose music rather than football, and allegedly wrote his first song at the age of 9 after being given his first guitar by his parents, and he was already out auditioning for bands well before leaving school. So, having said that, his first professional outing was with a Glasgow band called the Stoics, but after a falling out with a fellow member, Jim Doris, Miller relocated to London, which of course so many people did in those days. All of the musicians seemed to head straight down for London, didn't they? And he spent a bit of time down there living in the Kentish town flat of his long-time mate Jimmy Dewar. Now, Jimmy Dewar is a well-known musician in his own right. He was in Stone the Crows at the time, and later on was the bass player and singer with Robin Trower through that big line of classic late 70s albums. Talking of Robin Trower had just left Procol Harum, and he was around that particular scene as well, and he quickly became friendly with Frankie, as too did the former Jethro Tull drummer Clive Bunker. Now, the three of those very nearly formed what would have been a bit of a supergroup, which was going to be called Jude, which would have had Robin Trower, Clive Bunker and Frankie Miller. Sadly, that never really came about. Whether they actually ever got down to recording anything, I don't know, but if they did and somebody's got it, it would be certainly nice to hear it. In fact, there was one track written by Frankie Miller and Robin Trower called I Can't Wait Much Longer that actually did appear on the first Robin Trower Band album. Not long after the Jude experiment was halted, Frankie was offered a solo contract with Chrysalis and set about recording his first solo album. Now, Frankie had also become friendly with the band Brinsley Schwarz. Now, they were a pretty big draw on the London pub circuit, so much that they got a huge house in Northwood in Middlesex, and it got their own recording studio in it, which is pretty impressive for a band, which were really nothing more than a band on the London pub circuit. So Frankie very quickly became a regular visitor there, and they formed a good working alliance together, doing some jamming, and Frankie would also go and appear with them live now and again and do a bit of guesting. Seeing that they worked so well together, Chrysalis then sort of said, well, why don't you use them as your band on the first album? And it seemed to make sense to everybody, so the studio was chosen, and for some reason they chose to record it in Rockfield Studios in Monmouth, South Wales, during the latter part of 1972. So I thought there'd been plenty of recording studios they could have used in London. Why they chose to go to Wales, I'm not really sure, but they filled all their instruments up in a big van, along with lots of crates of beer apparently, and headed off for deepest, darkest Wales to record the 10 tracks that were going to become Once in a Blue Moon. There are 7 original Frankie Miller tracks on there. There's one written with Jim Doris back in the Stoics days, and there are 2 covers, one from Woody Dixon and then the seemingly obligatory for the time Bob Dylan track. Now, the band Brinsley Schwarz actually consisted of Brinsley Schwarz himself and Ian Gom on guitars, Bob Andrews on piano and accordion, Billy Rankin on the drums, and Nick Lowe on the bass. Now, a lot of you may remember Nick Lowe from his solo singles, career later on in the 70s, so it's a pretty tight band, of course. They also added onto this 3 female backing vocalists who were only billed as Bridget, Joy and Janice, no surnames involved. Ian Gom later said that he doesn't recall them being in Wales at all, and it's highly likely that their backing vocals were added at a later date at a studio somewhere else, although you wouldn't be able to tell from the performance, the production and the mixing is so good. You would think they were all there in a room having a good time, knocking out some tunes and knocking back the beer. Well, the album itself kicks off with a Frankie Miller pen track. In fact, the whole of the first side, all 5 tracks on side 1 were Frankie Miller compositions. The first one of which, You Don't Need to Laugh to Be Happy, is a mid-pace song that sets the mood for the album perfectly. It's got some tight instrumentation on it. You'd expect that, wouldn't you, from a band that work together all the time. It's got a great infectious rolling rhythm. There's plenty of room though there for Miller to express his Dylan-esque lyric to good effect. The vocal is gravelly and growling, and yet almost at some point seems to be sung through a smile, and it's easy to see why Miller carved out a successful career as a songwriter and became something of a darling of the Nashville set in later years. Despite this being his first album, you can tell he'd already honed the art of storytelling through lyric writing to perfection, and the words conjure up great images in the mind, not only through this track, but throughout the whole of the album. The backing vocals also add considerably to the track, and you'd never guess that they had been, in fact, added later on. For many people, it's the second track, though, that's the highlight of the album. I Can't Change It. It's a slow, soulful song full of brooding melancholy, and it was reportedly written by Miller when he was only 12. Now, the almost Spartan acoustic guitar and piano intro lead perfectly into Miller's vocal, which drives the song along with feeling and passion. The instruments and the backing vocals, again, are perfectly tailored, punctuating between the lyric to great effect, never interfering with Miller's vocal melody, but adding to it without ever trying to steal the limelight. For many, this is as good a vocal as Miller ever recorded, and the song has been used several times actually in film and TV production, so even if you've not actually got a copy of this album, you may have heard it without realising it, because not only was it in that great series Life on Mars, but also Cracker, which of course was set in Scotland. There's a scene where Robbie Coltrane is having one of his deep and dark melancholy sort of thoughts, and he's sitting outside, pretty sure he's got a bottle of whiskey in his hand. You can hear Frankie Miller belting out I Can't Change It through the open window. Great stuff. That, though, isn't the greatest accolade for this song. You'd think it probably would be, but what is the fact that Ray Charles, that Ray Charles, chose to cover it on his album Brother Ray Is At It Again. Now, that's quite a feat for someone who at the time was pretty much unknown, really. And Miller must have had to pinch himself as he recorded listening to Ray Charles and all those others as a boy with his mothers and sisters. And so, there you go, Frankie Miller, second track on his debut album, covered by Ray Charles. The pace quickens again now for track 3, which is Candlelight Sonata in F major. Now, that's a rather curious title, but Miller must have preferred it to the more obvious title suggested by the lyric. It itself chugs along with a nice jaunty rhythm, and it isn't difficult to imagine it could have done well as a single. The honky-tonk piano solo is also a nice touch, and it's a perfect follow-up to its brooding predecessor. We go more into the country side of things next with the heavily country-tinged Anne Eliza Jane. It's another great Miller lyric in the way that it tells a story. It conjures up great images of the old Wild West. You'll have images of people walking into saloon bars and all sorts of stuff. It's got an infectious chorus, and it was a particular favourite of Frankie Miller's, and it remained in the live set for quite a few years. The final track on side 1 is probably the rockiest track on the album. It probably wouldn't be able to place on one of his later albums, to be honest, maybe even Full House. It's a track called It's All Over. It's got a lovely, short but tasteful guitar solo. It probably isn't anything spectacular, but it's a good way to end off side 1, and it gives you a little bit of an idea that Frankie can rock it out with the best of them when he wants to. Side 2 gets underway with a track called In No Resistance. It's another one of those country-tinged, faster-paced tracks that became a part of Miller's trademark in later years. The hard riffing acoustic guitars accompany the vocal well, and whilst the song isn't anything revolutionary, it's still a great track and a good one to kick off side 2 of the album. As with side 1, the second track on side 2 is a slower, more bluesy and soulful affair. It's a track called After All I Live My Life, and this is the track that was co-written by his old Stoics mate Jim Dorris. And once again, the musicians leave Miller to just drive the song along with his own mournful vocal. They just add to the song now and again with nice little touches here and there. The organ work of Andrews is particularly effective on this track, going underneath the vocal and then doing a nice brief solo as well. The song itself had already been recorded by Kenny Rogers in the first edition on their 1970 album Tell It All Brother, and Lulu had also recorded it as well, but you can be pretty sure that neither of them gave it the treatment that Frankie did. Another interesting point about this one is that it was later on used in the Johnny Depp film The Rum Diary. The first of the two covers is up next, and that's in the shape of the, as I said earlier, obligatory Bob Dylan track. It seemed everybody in the 60s and early 70s was sticking a Bob Dylan track on their album. This one is just like Tom Thumb's Blues, and it tells the story of a trip to Juarez in Mexico, where the narrator encounters all sorts of woes, and the lyric references many literary figures such as Poe and Kerouac, and the song's it's got no chorus at all, and Miller's vocal appears to have been multi-layered or given a slight echo. The overall feeling of the song to me is quite dreary, and for me it's one of the lesser tracks on the album, but that's just my opinion. It's still a great track and a little bit different to most of the others. Now, what comes next is the exact opposite of that in many ways. Another song which some people will probably think is the worst track on the album. For me, I think it's the best because it's the most fun. Mailbox. It's got the most ridiculously simple, catchy organ sort of melody riff that is just absolutely fantastic. And once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. It's one of those things that will just stay in your head forever. And it's a good, fun song. It's the sort of thing that you would have expected to have heard on the radio every 5 minutes. The swirling keyboard sound at the end of the song is also a great touch. It's a nice short, brief guitar solo. It's probably the most frivolous track on the album, but it's 3 minutes of absolute fun, and I'm obviously not the only one who thinks that way, because the former Thin Lizzy guitarist Brian Robertson, who actually played with Frankie on his last proper solo album, Dancing in the Rain, covered this on his 2011 solo album Diamonds in the Dirt. So I'm guessing that they may well have played that when they toured the Dancing in the Rain album, which would have been at the back end of the 80s. The final track on the album is a second cover, and it's Willie Dixon's I'm Ready. Now, as I'm sure most of you know, everybody just about had a crack at this track, whether they did it live or whether they did it on an album, but Frankie's version may well be the sleaziest and the best of the lot. The original version, of course, was done by Muddy Waters, even though it was written by Willie Dixon, and Miller's version is just totally dripping in sleaze. He delivers the lyric in a sort of a snarly, gravelly, sleepy drawl, which is just, you just got to hear it to believe it. It's fantastic. Frankie also plays harmonica on this track, and the only slight criticism I've got of it is I don't think it sits comfortably at the end. I mean, it's a very, very small thing to sort of potentially complain about, but I would have just liked another track to end it off. That would have sounded better to me if it had had something to follow it up. Anyway, Once in a Blue Moon was released in January 1973, so as we said at the beginning, it's celebrating its 50th birthday this year. As many people may think, it's criminally short, coming in at less than 33 minutes, but that was sort of the norm in those days for albums. They wanted to keep them at less than 18, 19 minutes aside for sound quality purposes and all that stuff. And looking back at it, it's very difficult to believe that this is Frankie Miller's first recording, because everything is just so professional. It seems as though doing it for a lifetime already. And songs are so well crafted, there's no just a perfect debut, really. The album itself was produced by Dave Robinson, who later went on to be a founder of Stiff Records, and the 2003 CD remaster features 4 extra tracks in demo form. So there you have it then. That's Frankie Miller's first solo album, Once in a Blue Moon. Now, one little curiosity to take a little look at before I say goodnight is the album cover. Now, you might think there's nothing wrong with the album cover. Well, there isn't anything wrong with the album cover. There's the album cover. I've taken it out of its protective sleeve so that it doesn't reflect. Perfectly good picture of a cool looking Frankie on the front. Similar story on the back with a list of the tracks and the credits and all the people that are on it and all that sort of stuff. Nothing wrong with that either. But then you take it out of the sleeve and you get the inner bag. Now, the inner bag is where it puzzles me somewhat, because there's the first side of the inner bag. You can probably see that well enough. It's got the lyrics to 4 of the tracks on there, and Eliza Jane in No Resistance, I Can't Change It, and You Don't Need to Laugh to Be Happy, 4 Frankie Miller compositions. Now, the rest of the tracks on the album, 3 more Frankie Miller compositions. Originally one written with Jim Doris, and then a Willie Dixon and a Bob Dylan. Now, possibly they might not have been allowed to reproduce the Willie Dixon and the Bob Dylan lyrics, but why couldn't they reproduce the rest of the Frankie Miller lyrics? Because look, on the other side of the bag, it's just totally blank with a Chrysalis logo at the bottom. Now, the question is, did they forget to print them? Or have I got the only one that's like this? I don't know. Let's hear from anybody that's got a copy of the Frankie Miller album, first pressing, Once in a Blue Moon, with the lyrics on both sides. Because it's a puzzler for me as to why there's only 4 of the tracks that have got lyrics on there. Doesn't matter though, does it really? It doesn't take anything away from it. And the fact of the matter is, Frankie's delivery is so good, you can work the lyrics out for yourself. Anyway, just to finish off with the final piece of housekeeping, if I can remember where I've put it, is, oh there we go, it's not back there. It's the CD. This is the CD remaster that came out quite a while ago now. It's probably a good 10 years or so. Now there's 4 bonus tracks on this in demo form. I Can See the Rain, Blow My Whistle, The Rules of the Game, and It's Raining. There's the 4 extra tracks on that. You can also get a copy of this album on the excellent box set if it's still available. It's called Frankie Miller, That's Who. I'm taking the naughty words out, and that's got all of his Chrysalis albums on one box set with about 4 or 5 CDs in it, and you used to be able to pick that up for about 20-25 quid, so that's an absolute bargain if you can get hold of one, especially as something we'll come on to later with his later albums, the second album, High Life. It's got the original mix of that, which isn't available anywhere else. So even if you're a big Frankie Miller fan and you didn't know that, it might have been worth sticking around until the end. So that's it then. I hope you've enjoyed the first proper review of the year and the little bit of a break, not having to look at me for 10 minutes. And I'll catch you all next time.